Okay, picking up where left off. Secondly, the accusation that these girls were sex slaves purposes contradicts what we know about the culture and about the event. Number one, most girls were married soon or immediately after they began menstruating in the ancient Near East, around age 12. And since infant and child mortality was so high, the average age of girls spared would have been around 5 to 6 years of age or slightly lower. Life expectancy wasn't a straight line like with childhood risk so high. All the horrible things ascribed to Israel in the Old Testament, pedophilia is the one conspicuous omission. That these little kids would have been considered sex slaves seems quite incongruent with their ages. And at this tender age, they would not have been very useful as slaves at all. Children raised in Israelite households were put to work around this age, sometimes doing light chores to help with the mother for up to 4 hours per day by age 7 or 8, according to families in ancient Israel. But 5 is still a little bit young. Instead, the Israelite families would have fed, clothed, and trained, cared, and sheltered many of them for several years before they could make much contribution to the family's existence or survival. Number two, unlike Greeks and Romans, the ancient Near East was not very into using slave captives for sexual purposes, even though scholars earlier taught this. Quoting from early Mesopotamian law, during the pinnacle of Sumerian culture, female slaves outnumbered male. Their owners used them primarily for spinning and weaving. Sages maintain that their owners also used them for sex, but there's little actual evidence to support such a claim. Point three, even if we allowed the age range to be older to include girls capable of bearing children, the probability is that this was not sex motivated but population economics motivated, as Carol Meyers points out in The Roots of Restriction, Women in Early Israel. Beyond this, however, the intensified need for female participation in working out the Mosaic revolution in the early Israelite period can be seen in the Bible. Looking again at Numbers 31, an exemption to the total purge of the Midianite population is to be noted. In addition to the metal objects which were exempt from utter destruction, so too were the young girls who had not known lying with a man. These captives, however, were not immediately brought into the Israelite camp. Instead, they and their captives were kept outside the camp for 7 days in a kind of quarantine period. Note that the unusual incubation period of the kinds of infectious diseases could conceivably have existed in the situation in 2 to 3 to 6 days. Afterwards, they thoroughly washed themselves and all their clothing before they entered the camp. This incident is hardly an expression of lavish male behavior. Rather, it reflects the desperate need for women of childbearing age, a need so extreme that the utter destruction of Midianite foes and the prevention of death by plague, as required by law, would be waived in the interest of sparing the young women. The Israelites weighed the life-death balance, and the need for females of childbearing age took precedence. But note that I lost my place here. But note the traditional interpretation of the passage is that all females were capable of bearing children were killed, not just those who actually were non-virginal. This would drive the average age quite low, although Hebrew text offers very limited support at best for this interpretation. I should also point out that the for yourselves phrase in 31:18 is not actually referring to for your pleasure, but for the reference to the opposite condition of for Yahweh, which is applied to all people or property which was theoretically supposed to be destroyed in such combat situations. The ban specifically indicated that all enemy people or property which was delivered over to Yahweh was to be killed or destroyed. By referring to for yourselves, then in this passage, means simply do not kill them. This can also be seen in the bounty was not for themselves actually, but was to be distributed to others within the community. Third, the accusation that the Midianites were singled out for destruction because the Midianites worshipped a deity named Baal Peor is not at all present in the text. Actually, no reason is given in the passage. In fact, the reason for the warfare is explicitly given in Numbers 25:16 as the unprovoked hostility or treachery of Moab and Midian, which we will look at a little bit later. The passage in 25:16 says, the Lord said to Moses, treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them, because they treated you as enemies when they deceived you in the affair of Peor, and their sister Cosbi, the daughter of the Midianite leader, the woman who was killed when the plague came as a result of Peor. The reasons are stated in this passage as hostilities by the Midianites and deception of Israel by them in the affair of PR. Nothing at all is said about treating them as enemies because they worship different gods. So at least we should see that some of the accusation elements about some of these statements made by skeptics indicated by the data are not at all there. There was no need for virginity testing. Rape or sexual slavery is not at all in the passage, and the reason for the combat is basically has nothing to do with disagreement over land or worship of other gods, but instead it is a judgment that's brought about because the Midianites unprovoked basically attacked Israel unprovoked and brought about the deaths of 24,000 Israelites. Okay, so then what was all this bloodshed about? To establish the why of this, we need to tell the whole story and look at all the players, the Midianites, the Moabites, and the Israelites. First of all, who were the Midianites? Essentially, the Midianites were descendants of Abraham through Keturah, and by the time of Numbers 31 were a tribal league of different clans and families. Some of the kin group lived around the Gulf of Aqaba and perhaps settlements, while other groups remained as nomads and raiders. According to the the Oxford Encyclopedia of Archaeology in the Near East, the extreme northwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula, we find through archaeology settlements and industry, probably and the names associated with Medina, the son of Abraham and Keturah, the ancestor of the Midianites of the Hebrew Bible. The Midianites are portrayed in these biblical traditions as nomadic sheep and camel herders, caravanners, and raiders, ranging over a wide territory to the south and east of Canaan. According to the International Standard Encyclopedia, the Midianites ranged over a large area, including northwest Arabia, southern Transjordan, positions of Negev, and possibly southern Sinai. The land of Medina probably the range of the Midianites at one time was very large. The Midianites basically consisted of a league of tribes. This league dominated the peoples in the areas of the southern Transjordan. Around the time of the Exodus, the Midianites closer to Egypt where we have the evidence of settlements and industry were hospitable to Moses and had a positive image in the biblical tradition. This particular tribe of Midianites that was hospitable to the Israelites are called Canaanites. The hospitality of Jethro to Moses is commendable. The Canaanites, again, as I stated, was a Midianite tribe. This is according to the International Standard Encyclopedia. The Canaanites accompanied Judah into their inheritance. They were spared by Saul and Saul's attack on the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, and David cultivated a friendship with them. The Midianites, along with the Amalekites, or the people of the east, periodically harassed certain tribes of the Israelites during the period of Judges. The Midianites preyed upon Israel, and the Israelites had difficulty dealing with the Midianites, who used camels to make long raids and retreat quickly. This is according to the International Standard Encyclopedia. So the Midianites were allies of the Amalekites, as we've discussed in some previous videos in 1 Samuel 15. The Midianites are also allied with Moab under the control of Shion. Moab was closely associated with the Midianites, and so much that the elders of both peoples acted as one group. The Moabites had been on such friendly terms with the Midianites, the former was probably still largely nomadic, and from time to time, there has been strife between the inhabitants of the desert and the residents in towns and agricultural areas. This is according to the New Light on the Wilderness Journey and the Conquest. Finally, as a tribal league, the various tribal leaders had radically different attitudes towards life ethics in Israel. The Canaanites were, for example, allied with Israel, but those further north were generally hostile or predatory towards Israel. The Midianites, some tribes allied themselves with the Amalekites, and the more nomadic ones seem to have been operating as raiders and slave traders, whereas the less nomadic ones were pastoral or farmers, in other words. The northern Midianites were often linked with the cruel Amalekites and the Canaanites in the biblical narratives in Judges 6 and 7. We'll pick up with the Moabites in the next video.